All right, here we go. So LambdaSchool JavaScript lesson number 3. And yeah, we went over arrays yesterday, and today we're going to start diving into some stuff with objects, going into our other data structure. Let's see. All right, so yeah, let's dive right in. All right. Okay, so yesterday, this is a review. We covered an array, arrays. And arrays are a collection of different values that you can group together under a single variable name. So with the other variables, that you first learned about, var x gets 5, you have the variable name, and it has this value that is, it's a number, or it's a Boolean value, or something like that. Then an array, it can be a collection of different values. And they don't even have to be the same type. We can, throw all these other random things in there, and it still works. Generally, best practice is you kind of keep the same thing inside of an array. So like if it's an array of strings, you keep that consistent. If it's an array of objects, you keep that consistent. So today, we're learning about a way to, I guess the simplest way to think of it is it's a variable that can group together different types of things. So instead of an array where it's this list, what we're doing is for an object, we're creating it's a list of key and value pairs. So with an array, it's just hi there, and if we want to access them, we use the index, we use the numbers of that index. So to access hi, we would do ARR bracket 0, and that would reference this first value. So with an object, you actually have named keys on it. So let's say this object, we'll call this a user. So this is like a user object for our application. So we'll have a username. Do mine. That's the one I use for Slack. So you can see there's a key value pair. I'll walk you through a little bit more in a second. Then let's say that my password is password. All right, super secure. All right, and then let's do, we'll say like a number value. So we could do age, say I'm 99 years old. And then let's do likes ice cream. We'll bring that in again, and we'll go true. So you can have Boolean values on it. And you can even put functions on here. And when a function is on an object like this, we call it a method. And so we'll go say hi, and then we'll, all right. So just kind of walk through it pretty quick there, but now I'm going to go back through and kind of guide you through each step of it. So the important thing to know is these colons, and the colons are what separate the keys from the values. So the stuff that's on the left of the colon, that's the word that you use on the outside on the object to access the value, And what I mean by that is if we wanted to print out my username, we would go user.username. So this dot right here. So user matches up with this. User is the user object. And then dot says that we want to access a property that is declared on the object. And a property, you can think of it as kind of like a special variable that has been stuck to this object. And this object has a bunch of different variables that we can stick to it. And so we can have this user variable that has a bunch of other different variables, we call them properties, but a bunch of other variables that are all stuck to it and attached to it. And what this does is this gives us a nice way to have a bunch of related variables that we can all group together under a single name that we can pass around in our application. So now instead of having to keep track of all these different usernames in different places and trying to keep them related with their passwords, we can take a username, a password, and all this nice information about the user and stick them together under a single variable name. And so that's what an object solves. That's the problem that it solves. And you will use them all the time in JavaScript. You're using objects all the time. When you're using arrays, most of the time they're arrays of objects. It's just, yeah, you're constantly using them. If you've noticed down here, so console is an object. And so when I go console.log, I'm accessing this variable that's stuck to the console object, or a method. And so I go console.log, and then just like you've seen before, when we invoke functions, we use parentheses, and then we pass in an argument. And the argument I'm passing in here is the username property that's stuck on the user object, which is this, Sunjiaming. So Sunjiaming is what will be printed out to the console. So let's go pull it up. And actually, let me make sure that I have my thing open from Austin to make sure that, just so people can point things out. Okay. Anyway, he sends me messages that you guys ask in Slack, so I can make sure I'm addressing them during the video. So someone asked, how is an object different from a dictionary? So it's the same idea. It's the same idea. And as far as like dictionary implementations in specific languages, I don't know a lot of like specific differences, but an object is essentially a JavaScript dictionary. It's also it's also a, if I'm not mistaken, a hash table as well. The way that the keys are implemented, there's a constant lookup. So for those of you that care, it's you can treat it like a dictionary or a hash table. If you've never heard of those terms, don't worry about it. One second. Okay, so let's go print this out in the terminal. All right, so I'm here in the terminal. I'm going to zoom in. All right, so I'm going to go node space scratch.js. Try to get in the habit of using tab to autocomplete. If you autocomplete, it reduces the likelihood of you having typos, and plus it just saves you a ton of time. So always autocomplete it whenever you can. Great, so we see Sunjiaming is printed out to the console. Let's jump back into terminal. Or not terminal, Sublime, yeah. So that's what, yes, that's how we access that object. So let's look at age. So user.age, back in the terminal, 99, so works just the same way. All right, let's say that with the age, I am now a year older. Let's go user.age, we can go ++. So that increments age by 1. So it takes user.age, increases it by 1, and then we'll log out user.age. 100. Okay. Let's print out the user object so you can see all the stuff that's on it. So this is just the user object, not an individual property, but the whole thing. You can see here, username, Sunjiaming, password, age 100. Likes ice cream, true, say hi, and then it just says function. It doesn't print that all out to the console, just because that could get really big really fast. Okay. All right, let's do, okay, so now let's invoke this say hi method. So I'm going to get rid of this console.log. So now we're going to go user.say hi. So what we're doing again is we access the user object, user, and then we go .say hi. So .say hi invokes this method that we've defined here. And again, the way that we define the method is we write say hi. That's the key. These are all just keys. It's just a bunch of letters with a colon after them. And that's just a string that we use to identify a key on the object, like a variable on the object. And then after the colon, we can put the different values. And here with a method, we have an anonymous function. We call it an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name. So I mean, we could do something like that, but we don't need to. And so right here, we're just, yeah, it's just an anonymous function. And so we don't need to give it a name because we're always referencing it with say hi. For stack trace purposes, sometimes people will put names on these so that we don't see anonymous functions everywhere, but don't worry about that right now. So say hi, yeah, so the name say hi references this, which is this function. And so when we invoke say hi, it is invoking this function right here. It's user.say hi. So now let's go over and see what happens when we run this. Hello. So it invokes it. It printed out the function. Okay. So all right. So now this is kind of the this is one of the ways to add properties to an object, to declare an object. Now what we're going to do is we're going to, let's say that now that we've created the user, we want to add another property. So let's say that we have free users on our site, and then if they pay some money, they can be a premium user and get access to some premium content. So let's go user.isPremium, and we'll set this to true. And so we're adding this property onto it. We're saying user.isPremium. So what happens here is the computer, it's going to look on the user object, and it's going to say, okay, is there an isPremium key? It's going to say, is this it? 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 No, there is no isPremium key. So it takes and it adds one. It adds an isPremium key on there, and then it gives it the value of true. So that's what is happening behind the scenes. And so user.isPremium gets the value true. And so now if we log out the user object, back in the terminal, you see here that we have this isPremium true property has now been added to it. Okay. So yeah, that is how we that's how you like dynamically during runtime add properties. Okay, so here's another instance. So let's say that that we don't know the name of the property that we want to add, that we want to be selecting on the user. So let me think of an example for this. So let's say that okay, so if we do var coordinates, and so what we'll do here is we'll have our latitude, and okay, here's what we'll do. So we'll have all right, I don't know if these make any sense, but we'll have latitude and longitude coordinates. So I'm just putting numbers in here, but that's obviously not the right format, but we're just gonna just some random coordinates for whatever type of coordinate plane our application uses. And let's say that we would need to access one of the keys on there. And so I wrote the key as a string. Or so the key is a string. So anything that you try to make on an object as a string, then it will or every time you try to add a key to an object, it becomes converted into a string. So if we go coordinates and then go .100, see this isn't going to work because this is a number. And so what we have to do is we have to go we have to do these brackets on there. It's bracket notation that we use to access the key on the object. You know what? I started teaching two different concepts at once. I'm going to back up for a second. Let's go back for a second. Started to realize that was going to get a little confusing. So all right. So let's say that we have thing called squares, and it's an object. And so what we're going to do on the squares object is we're going to add a number to it. That'll be the key. So like the number 5, and then its value will be that number squared. So that number times itself. So I'll show you with an easy example. So the first one we'll do 2. So we can't go squares.2. We have to go squares bracket 2, and then we set it equal to its value, which is 4. Let's say that we want to add another one for 5, set it equal to 5. And so There's dot notation for accessing a property on an object, and then there's bracket notation. And so as you look at it, this is very similar to how an array looks. And so in here, you can pass in a number, or you can pass in a string or a variable name that maybe you don't know the property before the code runs. You don't know what property is going to come in. I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. Right now, I'm just going to print out squares so you can see what this looks like. Okay, so now let's jump over. Let's look at squares. Here it is. So the key 2 has the value 4. 5 has the value 5. And so as you notice, they put quotes around the 2 and they put quotes around the 5. Keys on an object always they get turned into strings. So you just have to remember that with the typing, that they're strings. They're not. They're no longer an integer. It's the string that has a 2 in it. It is not it's not considered a number 2. So you can't do math. If you tried to add it, or increment it or do something like that, it wouldn't behave in the way that you would expect. So another instance where we would use these brackets is, let's say that we have a function here, and we'll call it add property. And it's going to take in an object and then a new property. So you have a problem similar to this in your homework. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pass in this user object to the function add property. Let me get rid of this. Kind of simplify this down. Okay, clean up our workspace a little bit. All right, so this function add property, we have the user object declared. Now let's go add property, and then we're going to pass in user. And then, well, let's say new property, and then I'll give it a new value. And this is kind of a pretty roundabout way of doing this, but it's just to show you how you can use variables to set property names. So we're going to add a property on the user object, and we're going to call this lives in US. Okay, so lives in the United States. And then we're going to set this to false. So the user does not live in the United States. And we will select the user. Okay, so now let's write out the function. So in here, we have the object that's coming in. So add property matches up with this function. We pass in user. So this user object that we defined at the top, we're passing in here as an argument. So object is a reference to user when the add property function is being invoked here. So user is object. So we have object, and this string, that's the name of the new property. That's the new property that we want to add onto the object. If we use dot notation and set it equal to the new value that we want to add, what's going to happen is the property name is not going to be lives in US. The property name is going to be new property. And so that's not what we want. Let's console log this, so that way we can see the result. So let me show this real quick. So okay, I thought it was going to maintain that reference value, but let me just all right, so let's return the object, and let's we're going to console log the result of this. All right, now let's come down here. Oh yeah, so actually it did. Oh yeah, it did print up there because I was looking for lives in the US, but not new property. So it did maintain the rest. But anyway, so new property is anyway, that's the key. That's the name of the property that was added to the object. We didn't want that. We want it to say lives in US. And so we would use bracket notation here. So this allows us to dynamically set the property name. And so let's go back in now and print it out. Okay. So now we see that the property name is lives in US, and then false. Okay. So something interesting that you noticed is that if I don't return the object, let's say with logging it, I just log out the user, and just look at that. So the user goes into the function, gets the property added to it, and then we print out user. So as you see here, lives in US. So this behavior, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's a little different from the way other variables and values have behaved in JavaScript that you've worked with. So with add property, when we pass in the user object, we just modify the object. We didn't need to return anything. We didn't have to return a new value. When we do this work on this object, when we add the property to it, it goes back and adds it to this original spot in memory. So when we create this user object and then we pass it into this function, it's the same object in memory, the same one. It doesn't make a copy of it. So like if I passed in the number 5 here and I changed it inside the function, the variable out here that had number 5 on it wouldn't change. It wouldn't be modified. But if I pass in, when you pass in an object to a function and it gets modified, that object, the original object is modified. There's only one object in memory. It doesn't get copied unless you explicitly try to copy it. So if that went over your head, don't worry about that too much. That's just kind of a side behavior note. Arrays behave the same way. They occupy a single space in memory, and they're never copied unless you explicitly do that. Whereas other variables are often copied when you pass them around. Okay. All right, okay. So now, let's say, so those are the two ways to add properties. We have our dot notation and bracket notation that we can use to add properties and properties to an object. So now, let's say that we no longer want to deal with ice cream. We've pivoted, we've changed what our app does, and it has nothing to do with ice cream anymore. So we're deleting the likes ice cream property off of all of the user objects. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove the property. And you do that just by saying delete user.likes ice cream. Okay, so now let's go print out the user. Okay, you can see there's no likes ice cream property on there, just removed it from the object. So that's the only time you should use delete. You shouldn't use it to remove things from an array. You shouldn't use it in like any other circumstances, really. You just use it if you want to remove a property from an object. So yeah, so that removes the property totally from the user object. Okay, so now let's say that we wanted to iterate over our user object. So what we learned about yesterday is we had our we had our for loops that we would use to iterate over arrays. So we have a slightly different loop that we can use to iterate over all the different keys on an object. So let's do this. Let's go. All right. So the form that it takes is you go for var key in the object. So in this case, it's the user. And so what that does is that goes key by key on the user object. And let's log out the key. And let's log out the value. This is the other instance where that bracket notation comes in handy. So if we go user brackets key, that allows us to dynamically access the property on the object as we're iterating over it. And so what this is going to do is it's going to start with username. And so it will go and the key will be the string username. And then down here we can go user brackets username. And so we can't go user.key because if we tried to go user.key, it would look specifically for a property on the object called key. And so we have to wrap it in brackets. So we wrap it in brackets, and then that allows us to dynamically access those properties. All right. Let's see. Oh, I'm seeing that the video and audio dropped for the squares part. Maybe redo. Okay. All right. So here's yeah. So the main times that you're only really ever using bracket notation when you have a variable that has a property name on it. So when you're writing your code, before the code runs, you don't know what that specific property name will be. You don't know what property name that variable is going to hold. That's when you use bracket notation. So right here we use bracket notation. That's the most convenient way to access the different properties around the user object. So now let's print that all out so you can see how this works. Then we'll walk through it step by step. Okay, so now we look and we see that first thing it did is the key of username, prints that out, and then it prints out the value. So if we jump back into here, so the key is username, and then user bracket key is Sunjiaming. So again, key is username. And so this is like saying, like doing that. So this, I'm just pulling this down right here. So this and this are equivalent. Those both access it the same way. You use bracket notation if you don't know if you want to use a variable to be accessing the property on the object. Okay. All right, so let's go back over. All right, so yeah, and then key password, value password, key age, value 99, key say hi, value function, and it prints out the function. Okay, so this is how you iterate over keys on an object, and then this is how you use bracket notation. This is primarily the time that you're going to use it if you're using a for-in loop. Most of the time you're just using the dot notation. I feel like with me, it's probably 99% of the time I'm using dot notation, and then there's a few circumstances where I have to use it this way. So always use dot notation unless you can't. And if you can't use dot notation, use bracket notation. So that's just the general rule. Always use dot notation. So if we wanted, we could do this. Over run this again. See, it all still works. So we just use bracket notation there. We could use a variable. Back over, run it again. Oh, it still works. So they're all different ways of just accessing properties on the object, but always use dot unless you have to use a variable to access the property in the object. Okay, and that was pretty much the point that I was emphasizing with that square function that the sound dropped on. All right, next topic. Okay, so all right, so let's say that we're inside of this function right here. So say hi, and let's say that we wanted to access properties that are on this object. So when say hi gets invoked, let's say that we want to print out my username. Let's do then we're gonna just print out sentence. All right, so then how do we get this username? How do we access this username from inside of this function? So you could do user.username, but let's say that this object is inside of an array. And so like this, we now have this object that is inside of an array, and we could have 1,000 other user objects in here. So then user, doesn't make sense to use user.username because this object no longer is under the username variable. It no longer has a variable name referencing it. We could go users bracket 0, to try to reference it, but then what if we get moved around inside of the array? This is hard coded in, so if our spot ever switched in the array, then this would all of a sudden become useless. Or if this was the 10th object in the array, but then some of them get cut out, and all of a sudden we're the 7th object in the array, and again, that reference would break. So there's this convenient keyword that we have that is called this. And this, when used inside of a method, it references the object that it's a part of. That's we're starting just with the most basic, the most simple explanation for this. It can get, there's a few more specific rules with it that we'll be going over in the next lesson, but we're just kind of touching on this a little bit today. So what we can do is we can go this dot username. So sentence is equal to the string, my username is plus, so we're concatenating this dot username, and then this refers to the object that the method is part of. And so it looks at this object, that's what this is this object, and then it grabs the username property, which is here. So Sunjieming, and Sunjieming gets concatenated onto the end of the sentence, and then we log the sentence. So let's run that now. Users 0 dot say hi. So what this is doing is we're saying users, which is the array, and we're grabbing the first object that's in the array, and then we're accessing the say hi method that is on that object and invoking it. So users, we got the first object, so this right here in effect is this at the time that the code is running. It's that object. So that object dot say hi, which is this method. So now let's come back into terminal. My username is Sun Jieming. All right. Okay, so yeah, so kind of went over some crazy syntax for brackets and dots, and anyway. So something interesting in JavaScript is pretty much everything is everything is an object. So strings under the hood are actually built using objects. Arrays are technically objects. Objects are objects. Functions are actually objects. You can chain properties and methods onto them and everything. And we're going to go over some of those things in tomorrow's lesson. But yeah, there's essentially just a lot of anyway. Objects are used all over the place in JavaScript, and it's one of the topics that you'll want to become very comfortable with. Okay. All right, so again, this is a review. To create an object, we can do it kind of two ways. We can go user, we can go user.username gets Ben, user.email gets Ben at LambdaSchool.com, or we can go var user gets, we can go user and I'm sorry, not user, username, and then email LambdaSchool.com. Okay, so they're doing the exact same thing. They both end up creating the exact same, like the object is in the same format when it's created. Yeah, so generally, if you know the properties and you're filling them out from the very beginning, this is the format that you use. If like you have a bunch of, so like if you're creating your object and then later on you have a bunch of other logic that's happening, and then you have some if statements that decide which properties need to be set or whatever, then you'll use this format later on to add properties to an object. So generally, yeah, so if you're defining the object at the top of your code and you have everything you need, this is generally the format you use. Later on, if you need to modify and tweak it, you use like this format, use dot notation to access it. always use dot notation over bracket notation unless you can't use bracket notation, or I mean, unless you can't use dot notation. So if there's like a variable or something like that. Yeah, okay, so those are objects in a nutshell. And math is a global object that you've seen that you have available everywhere that has a bunch of different properties and methods on it. Console is another one. And there's a few others, but those are the ones that we've covered in class. All right, let's see. One more thing. Okay, so let's look at I'm going to pull open the day one homework, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what the linter is. Homework. All right. So now I'm going to go Sublime. Okay, so this is something that I have specifically programmed into my computer. This won't initially work on your computer. Essentially, what I'm doing, and I'll do this. I'll do this the other way. I'm going to go Open Dot. This is something that works on Mac, and it opens up the folder in Terminal. And so then I can right-click on it, and then I can open it somehow with. Oh yeah, I can. I'll just drag it over onto Sublime, and I can open it with Sublime. Okay, so all I'm doing is opening the folder in Sublime. That's what that little shortcut is. And then I can look up some steps for how you guys can add that. It's a little complicated, but anyway. All right, so okay, so good, this is clean. All right, so let's go in. I'm gonna run these tests. Okay, so you see that they all failed. Okay, so these are the normal tests that I've programmed in. We're going to go in and check every single function, see if it works. All right, so let's go in. All right, multiply by 10. So return num times 10. So plug that in, go over to terminal, run the test. All right, one passed. Sweet, so you come up here. Okay, so what linting does, so in JavaScript, if you leave off a semicolon, it's not technically, like the code will still run and work. It's just kind of messy and bad practice. So we come back into terminal, we run this again. The linter says, hey, missing semicolon on line 4 on column 18. So we come back into Sublime. Okay, row 4, go to the end. Oh, yep, sure enough, missing semicolon. Plug it back in. Now it will work. There's some other ones. If I declare a variable and never use it, X is defined but never used. It doesn't like that. If I do string gets I and I use double quotes, it's going to complain about that. So anyway, X is defined but never used. String is assigned a value but never used. Strings must use single quote. Anyway, these are essentially they're extra rules that are set up in there that enforce a cleaner coding style. It's kind of painful at first because you're like, hey, this worked, on JSBin or something online. Like, the code, I got it to work in another environment. Why is it not running here? And well, it's because there's something a little messy with your code that needs to be fixed, and it can be a little painful, a little frustrating at first, but it helps you enforce. Or it helps you establish these good habits and enforces these good practices. Linters are used everywhere, and they're used. Most major tech companies use them. It's considered a best practice. Some people don't like the term best practice, but it's considered a best practice. Generally to use them. So that's what's going on there. So if you see a linter, if you see a linting error, you go into your terminal and you see all these. You're gonna have to fix all of these before the other tests will run. And so once we go in and we'll get rid of that unused variable, get rid of that unused variable, we save it, go back to the terminal, run the code again, and then now we see that all the tests are in. Okay, with this one passing. All right. Oh yeah, so now if you look down at the bottom too, module is a thing in Node. It's a global object. There's an exports property on it, and we're setting it equal to an object. And on here, we're putting all these methods. We're saying multiply by 10 is the key, the property name, and then multiply by 10 right here is referencing the actual function up above. So if I scroll up, it's this one. So that actual function is being grabbed right here, and it's being attached to this property on this exports object, and then this exports object is what I'm grabbing in the test file, and that's how I'm testing the functions. So anyway, just that's what's going on here. This is a big object that's being declared with a whole bunch of methods on it. It's being exported. All right. Let's see. Okay. That pretty much covers everything. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, so if you have any questions, let us know in Slack. And I'll be releasing the homework in just a few minutes. Also, yeah, so in our upcoming full-time and part-time course immersive programs, we're going to be covering advanced JavaScript. So this stuff right here is just kind of touching on the pre-course work, and so our students will already need to start at a pretty high JavaScript level. We jump right into ECMAScript 6 and data structures and algorithms and complexity analysis and a bunch of other CS concepts and advanced JavaScript and prototype and instantiation methods and all these different things. And then yeah, we get into React and Redux and client-side web application development, mobile optimization, and how to make your make your application look good on a mobile phone or a tablet or whatever. We go into backend development using Node. Again, this is all with JavaScript, and so yeah, you'll build RESTful APIs and relational and non-relational databases, server-side testing, mobile development using React Native, machine learning and artificial intelligence. We touch on that a little bit using neural networks. So you'll be you'll pull in an open source neural network library called Brain.js, and you'll be adding in some different features into your application and be training on some publicly available data sets. Yeah, we go over tooling and deployment, and then yeah, work on portfolio pieces and do career prep and things like that. So it's yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And our part-time class is almost full. We do have another opening, and yeah, we have a couple spots left in our full-time class. But yeah, so we'd love to have you come and apply. We have our next class will be opening up on June 10th. So, or July 10th, I mean. So when that one's done, so if the timing doesn't work out right now, then I would love to have you come and apply for our July 10th course. Yeah, if you have any friends or family that want to come learn some JavaScript, invite them to come to this course. I would also invite you to like this video and share a link to to our program, and be fun to get some more people in here to learn JavaScript and study together. It's been awesome seeing all of the support and everyone working together on Slack. Keep that up. Don't just be quiet, but ask your questions and jump in there and help people. And anyway, by doing all those things, we'll all learn together. So thank you so much, and the homework will be released in just a minute.